Good. We were on discussing the connotation of words, their feel, their implications, their nuances, their subtleties. Words have sound, they have tone, they have color. The dirty, unclean, and impure all mean the same thing. But there's nuance, there's differences. Soiled, sullied, stained, tainted, unsterile, unpurified, dusty, muddy, muddied, unwashed, black, blackened, polluted, defiled. Smutty. Yeah, smutty, cruddy, grimy, grungy, greasy, filthy, foul. These are all different ways of saying dirty, but very different. And there's no rule that this word is the right word or that word's the right word. It's a matter of your what you want to say, how you want to say it, your feeling, the choice. But getting the right word really makes a difference. Someplace I saw Stephen Hawking's book was called A Short History of Time.
Brief history.
A Short History of Time. And his editor made it brief. Or suggested brief. Which makes a world of difference. Parallel structure, also called matching parts. This is Edward Gibbon. The various modes of worship which prevailed in the Roman world were all considered by the people as equally true, by the philosophers as equally false, and by the magistrates as equally useful. So that parallel structure serves his purpose. He's got his thoughts all lined up in parallel form. All his books are written in a learned language, in a language which nobody hears from his mother or his nurse, in a language in which nobody ever quarrels or drives bargains or makes love, in a language in which nobody ever thinks. Again, he's got multiple parallels there, which give force to his expression, to his thoughts. Macaulay is very good, by the way, if you want to study parallel structure, and you don't mind reading a demon.
You can learn from demons.
Excuse me?
You can still learn from demons.
Yeah, you can still learn from demons. The way he structures his sentences. In fact, I'll give you a little sense gratification here.
Was that true about Samuel Johnson as well?
Excuse me? That was about Samuel Johnson. Was it true?
About Samuel Johnson?
I've never read much of Samuel Johnston. You'd have to have Satsvarup Maharaj. Let's see. Wow. I see. Why is this? Oh, there it is. That's what I'm looking for. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is like, had Oliver Cromwell's government been a worse government, it might perhaps have been overthrown in spite of all of its strength. Had it been a weaker government, it would certainly have been overthrown in spite of all its merits. But it had moderation enough to abstain from those oppressions which drive men mad, and it had a force and energy which none but men driven mad by oppression would venture to encounter. He creates these sentences in which he uses parallel and antithesis, balancing them. He's very, very good at that. They valued a prayer or a ceremony not on account of the comfort which it conveyed to themselves, but on account of the vexation which it gave to the Roundheads, and were so far from being disposed to purchase union by concession that they objected to concession chiefly because it tended to produce union. This is about Lord Halifax, whom he much admired. In wit and eloquence, in amplitude of comprehension and subtlety of disquisition, he had no equal among the statesmen of his time. But that very fertility, that very acuteness, which gave a singular charm to his conversation, to his oratory, and to his writings, unfitted him for the work of promptly deciding practical questions. He was slow from very quickness, for he saw so many arguments for and against every possible course that he was longer in making up his mind than a dull man would have been. Instead of acquiescing in his first thoughts, he replied on himself, rejoined on himself, and sur-rejoined on himself. Those who heard him talk owned that he talked like an angel. But too often, when he had exhausted all that could be said and came to act, the time for action was over. So he creates this prose in which he makes exquisite use of parallel, of balance, of antithesis, there's a word for the figure of speech, of repeating a term many times over so that it carries through the parallel. There's a name for that. Quite pleasant to read, Macaulay. History of England is a safe work.
The parallels also create rhythm.
It also creates, he's got a beautiful sense of rhythm there. You can profit from reading Macaulay apart from his views. He was a great enemy of India and held Indians in disdain and created trouble there, but we won't deal with now. Let's see.
I got it.
Good. Okay, so this is the business of matching parts or parallel structure, which basically says that, well, parts should match one another, and specifically when they follow in a series or when they're part of the same structure, then like if you've got a Doric column, the next column should be Doric. And so on. In spring, summer, or in winter, violates parallel structure. Either you should get rid of the in the last time in spring, summer, winter, or in spring, in summer, or in winter, then you're parallel. Your parts are all matching. Clear?
No, I think
I've got three nouns following one another.
Yeah.
Spring, summer, and winter. So in spring, then in summer, or in winter.
Yes, okay.
Or in spring, summer, or winter.
Yeah.
The French, the Italians, Spanish, and Portuguese. It was both a long ceremony and very tedious. So the ceremony should have been both long and tedious. Or it was both a long ceremony and a tedious one. Because what you've got here is a noun, ceremony, and an adjective, tedious. So it was both a long ceremony and a ceremony of tedium, or something like that. My objections are, first, the injustice of the measure. Second, that it is unconstitutional. Clear? What the problem is? Not clear. Okay.
Second.
First and second, so you've got a first and second, you've clearly got parallel elements. But the first one is a noun clause, the injustice of the measure. And the second is an adjective, a sort of broken off adjective clause, that it's unconstitutional. My objections are, first, that the measure is unjust, second, that it's unconstitutional. Or my objections are, first, the injustice of the measure, second, its unconstitutionality. Then I have matching parts. But here I've got parts that don't match. I've got, Krishna enjoys his pastimes both in the material and spiritual worlds. Now you can probably get by with that, but more precise and matching would be both in the material world and in the spiritual world. Or in both the material and spiritual worlds. Then the parts match.
Such a small thing.
It's a small thing,
Makes a big
but it
difference.
makes a difference.
And it feels so just innate
Yes.
in our language that it's hard to even pick out what's wrong as much as just feel that it's wrong.
Right.
When you read it.
Just these little feelings that it's not quite right. And on the other hand, when somebody's attentive to this, the feeling that you're in good hands and that you're reading prose that's really refined. That's the difference. And it's the little stuff so often. Yes?
I didn't quite understand that. Could you, because...
The last one?
Yeah, the last one.
Krishna enjoys his pastimes. Good. Both in, both in this or in that. Or in both this and that. Now it's clear, yeah? Okay. Okay. Anything else about matching parts? Pronouns. Pronouns are a big one. Pronouns are proxies. They're stand-ins that take the place of words you use elsewhere. As in Yadunath and he. So he is a proxy for Yadunath. I, me, you, he, she, it, they, them. They're all pronouns. There are rules for handling these proxies, and there are principles, that is, the antecedents, words that go the word that goes before, the words they stand for. Here are the rules. This is, again, I think, from one of the Fowler brothers, who are big-time experts. There must be a principle in existence for the pronoun or proxy to stand for. Clear enough? The principle should not be very far off. There should not be two parties justifying even a momentary doubt about which one of them the pronoun represents. One pronoun should not represent two principles on one occasion, and the pronoun should seldom precede its principle. Now I'll illustrate all of those. There must be a principle. Dr. Barnes expressed his view before executives of the City Council of Churches. It was one of a number of meetings. So there's no principle for, it doesn't stand for anything. If I say, what's the antecedent of it? It's not Dr. Barnes, it's not his views, it's not the executives, the city council. It was one of a number of meetings. So I'm lost. This was one of a number of meetings, or something clearer. The meeting was one of several. That would be clearer.
As opposed to his, which does have the...
Yeah,
Dr. Barnes.
his clearly is a proxy for Dr. Barnes. I don't have to repeat Dr. Barnes every time. His does the job. But it fails. No proxy to stand for. The principle should not be far off. The process known as bhakti is revealed in the Vedic texts. On this path, the soul has three guides: the scriptures, the bona fide guru, and the conduct of saintly persons. By following it faithfully, the soul becomes fit to receive the grace of God and return home back to Godhead. What's the pronoun? And what does it stand for? The process known as bhakti. But when you read it, you have to go back and say, what does it stand for? And you should never have to read a sentence twice because of the way it's constructed, or a paragraph in this case. So, too far off. I've forgotten what it was supposed to stand for. And now I have to, so I'm wasting time. I'm losing you. Well, wait a sec. Hold on there. Could we go back a second? What was it? Oh, okay. Let's go continue. That's the effect of it, and that saps your energy and your enthusiasm to continue, because keep in mind, readers have the all-powerful option of putting your book down, of putting down your book or your article, unless it's like an indictment that you have to answer in a court of law or something. They can just put you down and say, too much trouble, too sloppy, something about it. And, all that effort that you spent, at least in their case, goes in vain. So we care for them. There should not be two parties justifying even a momentary doubt about which the pronoun represents. Srila Prabhupada faithfully presented the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was the ideal teacher of, and I have to say, there's in a lot of BBT books, the pronouns are not very carefully tended to. And we've tried to do remedial work on that, but there's quite a few places where you'd say he who. So this should not go on. She was one of 10 chicks Mr. and Mrs. Sherry purchased some time ago when they were 6 weeks old. The proxy should seldom precede its principle. This is the final point. When he realizes the importance of self-realization and engages in devotional service, dedicating himself without reservation, the yogi becomes perfect. And you're asking yourself all along, who? And it would be so easy to say, when the yogi realizes the importance of self-realization.
Also, if there were less words, like when he realizes the importance of self-realization, the yogi becomes perfect, is more acceptable, I would assume.
Yeah, but even then, why do it that way?
Yeah.
Unless you're trying to follow a Sanskrit verse and put...
Yeah, right, you're following the Sanskrit grammar. But it's the general idea is that your pronoun should follow its antecedent. The antecedent is the principle, and it's what comes before. So generally, your pronoun should come afterwards, unless you're trying to keep him in suspense. Sometimes you're writing something, you deliberately don't want him to ask who. But if you're not playing that game, why not just tell me right out when the yogi realizes the importance? Because then I don't have to hold. Otherwise, if I put my pronoun first, I have to put like a little bookmark there in my mind and say, okay, I've got an unfilled space here which is going to be filled down the line. And then when it's filled, I can, erase my bookmark and continue. But meanwhile, I have to juggle a certain part of my headspace has to be dedicated to keeping that ball up in the air for no good reason. You don't have a rhetorical purpose. You don't have any purpose, really. It's just, he is what came off my pen first. So when the yogi realizes the importance, he does this or he does that. Claro? This is a whole discussion about gender-neutral pronouns. I hate them. I confess to you that I come from a previous generation which didn't have to deal with any of this stuff and feels perfectly at home using masculine pronouns as generic.
Welcome to the next generation.
Welcome to the next generation. I've been assured by knowledgeable authorities that if you do this now, you'll be drawn and quartered or otherwise tormented, that you'll be rejected by every self-respecting, at least American or European reader, that you'll be
Liberal reader.
even conservative, yeah. And so one has to give attention to gender neutrality in one's prose. I chafe at it, I rebel against it, and so on. But here's how to do it. And it's particularly obnoxious when it's conspicuous. That's the main thing. And there are people who revel in being conspicuous about it. There are whole disciplines that revel in being conspicuous about it. When your client comes to you with an issue concerning identity, you may advise her such and such and such and such. On the other hand, if your client has a problem with obsessive compulsive disorders, you can advise him such and such. But if your patient has suicidal tendencies, then you should advise her, ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. They got to go back and forth between male and female gender just to show that they're even-minded and considerate and so on. And it doesn't matter what the hell happens to your prose. You've got to put people through this miserable exercise. I strongly advise you against joining that club. He/she or she/he is abominable. S/he is abominable and unpronounceable. Using one as a substitute is possible and sometimes appropriate, but it gets awfully stiff and formal. One should mind one's manners when one visits a relative or friend, unless one wishes to be. It can get very stiff. Sometimes it's fine and it has its places, but it's not a panacea by any means. They with a singular antecedent is what I think is probably going to win the day in the long run. That's my guess. As in, everyone should leave their shoes in the cloakroom. Totally ungrammatical, because everyone is a singular noun and it takes a singular verb and a singular, everything. But everyone should leave their shoes is totally idiomatic. And I expect that that's probably going to be the winner in the gender neutrality competition. That said, one has to be careful because it is ungrammatical, and especially in formal writing, people may stumble over it and say, what's that? But I think it's gaining ground and can be used with a fair amount of confidence in a lot of different situations. It would get my vote in many instances, but not all, by any means. He or she certainly covers the territory, but it's wordy and, again, conspicuous. If he or she expresses a problem with suicidal tendencies, you should tell him or her that he or she, there's only so far you can go with that.
Plus, I'm going to make a comment. In tutoring my high school students, this is the even younger generation. When they say he or she, they say, well, what about people who don't identify as either? Right? Like, that's very common now.
Those who?
Don't identify as
with either.
He or she.
Yeah.
So that's still a problem.
He or she or cisgendered individuals.
Exactly, yeah, so that's in the mind.
That's also there. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
Well, then they kicks in, because
Exactly.
it covers
They wins
everything.
the day then.
he, she's, or ambiguous entities. So yeah, that's another problem with he or she. And it calls attention to itself like anything. And you're trying to say something, but instead you're saying he or she, he or she, he or she. We've already dealt with switching between he and she and alternating sentences, paragraphs, or chapters, which I've seen very respectable authors do, and I hate it.
It's confusing.
They do that in like statistics textbooks. Like they'll do one problem as female and another problem as male.
Oh yeah. Everybody's being so careful now. And I get it to some extent, but not to the extent they'd like me to get it. Another way to handle things is to reconstruct a sentence to make it plural. So that's a way to avoid he or she, because they is generic. But that sometimes drains force. He or she is a particular person. They starts to be a group. And you can lose the force of having an individual. Your reader, if you do this to your reader, he's lost. Is different from if you do this to your readers, they're lost. You have one particular individual has more power rhetorically than a tribe. It sometimes works. You can sometimes do it. It's sometimes a very good fix. Just give it a they instead of a he or she. But that's the downside of it. That's the risk, that you can drain force from your sentences. You can sometimes drop a pronoun, give an a or an an or a the. A devotee has to be serious about devotional practices, or the devotional practices. A sincere devotee should not be rejected for his or her unintentional fall down. Could be.
You could drop it.
And unintentional fall down, or unintentional fall downs. Then you could just get rid of he or she. So much easier. And you were talking about the Times earlier today. New York Times is good at that. You know, if you read it with an editor's eye, you'll see that they're being gender neutral, and you don't even notice it.
Perfect.
That's your goal. Sometimes you can switch to second person or first. If I have a problem with suicidal tendencies, I, or if you have a problem, you. In good association, one will quickly advance in his spiritual practices.
Isn't that one is third person and it switches to his?
One is third person, but you can change it to first or third. First or second. In good association, I will quickly advance in my spiritual practices. Or you will quickly advance in your spiritual practices. So I get rid of the one he, one she problem. Got it? Okay. If one is serious about Krishna consciousness, one should seriously attend to his spiritual practices. You can make it to one's spiritual practices, but again, you're quite formal. What can you do?
Drop his. You were serious about Krishna consciousness. You should seriously attend to your spiritual practice. You can make it second person.
Yeah, if you're serious about Krishna consciousness, you should seriously attend to your spiritual practices.
It actually draws the reader in more.
In more.
Connects.
Or if you don't want to accuse him or order him around, if I'm serious about Krishna consciousness, I should seriously attend to my spiritual practices. Which says, in a more polite way, get on it, buddy.
You can cut down on the pronouns one who is serious about Krishna consciousness should seriously attend to spiritual practices, or to their spiritual practice.
Yeah, there's a there that you could use. It's a little, I think on the edge of acceptability. You could use a ones there if one is serious about Krishna consciousness. One who is serious about Krishna consciousness should seriously attend to spiritual practices. Yeah, you can do that. Or the spiritual practices of Krishna consciousness. Yeah. Another option is to recast a clause or a sentence entirely. When an editor sees no better alternative, he may recast the sentence. Someone want to recast the sentence for me?
It may be better to recast the sentence if there's no better alternative. Of course, I can't.
When there's no better alternative, recast the sentence.
Say again?
When there's no better alternative, recast the sentence.
Yeah, you could do that. Another way to do it?
An editor may recast the sentence if there's no better alternative.
Yeah. Seeing no better alternative, an editor may recast the sentence. Any other solutions? That's one way to go. Just say the sentence is beyond, as it stands, beyond redemption. You know, it's doomed to be gender specific, so we have to recast it. Okay. Okay, that's the gender neutral thing. I think that's the end of this slideshow. Nope, there's more. Oh, okay, good. Punctuation. Punctuation is a big deal. It matters tremendously. Your punctuation are your road signs. Which way am I going in this sentence? Where is it leading me? They're so important. To be able to mishandle punctuation is a major communications sin, and to handle it well is good. Don't do it just by feel. There are rules. 2/3 rule, 1/3 personal choice. Okay. There's a lot in punctuation, and I can give a day or 2 days talking about punctuation, about what they call full stops and half stops in Britain, which are our periods and commas. Semicolons, colons, they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. There's so much to be said about punctuation, and basically one just has to learn the rules and use them, and then know where discretion allows you some leeway. I won't say more about that right here unless you have a particular question. There's what's called comma splices, where you ought to have had a full stop, but you put a comma in there instead, which is usually illegal. There are places where it's not, but it's generally just sloppy. There's all sorts of things one needs to know about punctuation. There's a witty little book that became a bestseller some years ago. What was it called? Eat Shoots and Leaves, which isn't always quite right in its rules, but generally is a good guide, and it's a lot of fun to read. Yeah. Italics. This is an ISKCON topic especially. Italics serve various purposes. They identify titles of books and other such works. They serve for emphasis. They indicate words given in another language, and they have various other purposes. One purpose that they have in the King James Bible, italics are used to indicate a word that's not in the original Hebrew text, Hebrew or Aramaic text, but was supplied by the translators to complete the sense. That generally is a useful convention, but this is an instance of how that can go wrong. And he spake to his sons, saying, "Saddle me the ass." And they saddled him.
You can't make that stuff up.
In general, I think that ISKCON's and the BBT's books over-italicize. If you look at it as an outsider, the pages just run with italics. Apart from Sanskrit quotations and the word-for-word meanings, the text just runs with italics. Every Sanskrit word is italicized with some conventional exceptions. And I find it distracting. Right? I don't find it distracting. I believe that others find it distracting. For me, it's not a problem anymore after 45 years, 50 years. But you look at it and there's all these italics. And the most frequent use of italics is for emphasis. So you have all these words standing out when they really have no need to. So there's an alternative BBT policy about italics, which is essentially cut down on them. If a word is already in the English language, spell it however the Sanskrit, and if the spelling matches. So a word like yogi, which everybody knows, and which has well, let's start with yoga. Everybody knows the word yoga, but we have to italicize it because it's a Sanskrit word. Forget it. Everybody knows the word. We've spelled it right. Just leave it Roman. Then you get yogi. Okay, it's got a diacritic mark, but it's spelled the same way. It's Y-O-G-I, whether you have a diacritic or not. Why does it have to be italic when everybody knows the word? Keep your diacritic mark to make it scholarly and, for the odd Martian who doesn't know how to pronounce it. But don't italicize it. Similarly, nirvana, chakra, so many different, well, chakra is a special one because it's spelled differently. Spell them according to the Sanskrit system. So chakra is C-A-K-R-A. But if the word is already part of the English language in the form in which we're using it, just kill the italics. If it's a familiar word, they're words you might find in an English dictionary, but no one really uses it. But words that have really entered the language, drop the blessed italics.
What about an instance like pundit, which has become an English word but is spelled differently?
We go by the Sanskrit spellings.
Would you italicize?
Yes, because it's not an English word with an A on it.
Right.
Or with an A on it, it's not an English word. But other words, name me one, there's so many.
Different spellings?
Yeah, where the spelling is the same in English or Sanskrit, or rather with diacritic marks or the diacritical spelling or not, it's the same.
Mantra.
Mantra, there's a great example. Guru, mantra, so many in that category. Just drop your italics and let it go. And you'll get what, 20%, 30%, 40% reduction sometimes? The rules get a little more complicated. They're all in the BBT style guide, and I recommend them as being easier on the reader.
Are the titles of Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita being italicized in the BBT standards or not?
That's a good, interesting question. Conventionally, we've italicized Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and all other book titles. If you look in Chicago, okay, we're going to stop here a moment. The the University of Chicago Manual of Style is the most used style manual among American publishers. It's essentially the default standard. And it answers all sorts of questions like what's capitalized, what's Roman, what's lowercase, what's this, what's that. 400, 600 pages of standards. So when you get to book titles, if I remember, it's scriptural books or classical titles like the Odyssey or something are Roman.
Exactly, yeah.
So I recommend Roman for Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. I think in my book I used Roman.
I'm happy to hear that. I've been
Yeah.
wanting that to happen
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah, you can use Roman. They're Roman. They're the titles of scriptural books. Like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't italicized. So Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Puranas, and so on, uppercase Roman. The style guide, the BBT style guide, serves as a sort of exception guide. That is, our standard is Chicago, but when something's not dealt with in Chicago, or we don't like the way Chicago deals with it, then it appears in our style guide. So it's a useful guide. And if you see something that you question or something that's not dealt with in the style guide, then you can drop me a note. We do update it every year or thereabouts. Yes. Down style. The general down style refers to the practice of using uppercase letters only sparingly, as opposed to up style, which capitalizes liberally. This question was brought before Prabhupada because some of our early editors were capitalizing like lotus feet, capital L, capital F, divine abode, capital D, capital A. Anything that was holy got capped. And this question was brought up to Srila Prabhupada by, I believe, Hayagriva. Because Hayagriva and Satsvarup Maharaj were there as first BTG editors, and they brought this to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, everything down. Everything down. And then the exceptions were made for he and she. He for Krishna, Vishnu, and then she for Radharani. And then there's a little question, well, how far does it go, but it was sort of left like that, and that became BBT style, that everything was down except for divine pronouns, he and she for Radharani, and Vishnu expansions, and that's about it. And that's our standard for Prabhupada's books. But I recommend for other books, down style all the way, including your pronouns. Chicago recommends down style. That means God gets a lowercase h for he, Krishna gets a lowercase h for he, Radharani becomes lowercase she, no divine capitalization for anybody's pronouns. That's Chicago style. And I also recommend it as the best way to go. Even the King James Version of the Bible uses down style, lowercase he for God. ISKCON devotees seem to have the idea sometimes that this is like sacrilegious, it's disrespectful, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that means he has to have a capital He. But we recommend down style. And here's some examples of why down style makes a lot more sense. My boy, you, capital Y, must be tired from so much wandering in the forest. Go home with cap Y, your elder brother, and take your bath. I will look after the cows. Please don't delay any longer, or your mother will be unhappy and scold me. Please cooperate and go right now. So he's being treated like an ordinary boy, but with a respectful, divine personality of Godhead, capital U.
Clashing russes.
Mm-hmm.
Clashing russes.
Clashing rushes. It gets worse. Shishupal says to Krishna, I think Krishna to be no better than a crow. How can he, cap H, be fit to accept the first worship in this great sacrifice? And there have been devotees who've advocated lowercase or uppercase according to context. That will drive you mad. You have to decide each pronoun on a case-by-case basis. Forget it. Here's another one. Madhavendra Puri to Lord Krishna. Who are you? Capital Y. Where do you reside? And how did you know that I was fasting? It's like giving away the story. So I heartily recommend to you down style on your pronouns. Any questions? Good. And that's the end. Okay. Are there other items that you wanted to bring up to me before I go elsewhere and look at this and that and the other thing? Any issues you've run across or need dealt with? Yes?
What complications have you possibly encountered in dealing with editing discussions or conversations, classes into
Yeah, I just looked at my notes and saw that I have something about that. Let's see if I can find it. That was a very good question, and let's see if I have something about it. Okay, it's down here someplace. I believe it's here. How about that, huh? Editing lectures. Lectures suffer in print. A lecture that sounded superb comes out on, okay, hold on a second. This has my, I can't get to the places I need to get to here. Home. Yeah? No, file. Yes? No? There are places, oh, let's try it this way. Can I get to it this way? No. There it is. Okay. A lecture that sounded superb comes out on the page looking rambling or pedestrian. You lose the intonations, the eye contact, the body language. It's just not the same. That said, they can work. Ooh, look at that. Things out. The displays don't always behave themselves.
5-day
Yeah,
course,
what's
right?
ahead? Yeah, it was under.
5-day course.
Okay. From the car park. Okay. Okay. Edited lectures can, however, work. We have several Prabhupada books that are made from edited lectures. What you need to do. And let's see if I can change my view and still remain, oh, that's the problem, normal view.
If you slide the bar on the bottom, you can
Yeah,
center
that
it.
should be fine.
Okay, I'll just do that.
That's okay.
That's okay.
They can work. Oh, God. Blah. Don't ask me why. Ours is not the reason why. Ours is to pull this thing out of the sky. Okay. Let's get it right. So what do you need to do? If you're presenting the lecture as a lecture, which isn't the only way to do it, then try to keep the natural conversational sound. But still you need to polish the rough edges of spontaneous speech into a refined, smoother form suitable for print. So it sounds conversational. Like and who's involved with plays? You're involved with drama. So you know that dialogue isn't really the way people talk.
Right.
People are, real dialogue is something like, well, what do you think? Well, I don't know. I guess, anyway, I think you're being kind of...
There's much more overlapping.
What's that?
And there's much more overlapping.
Much more overlapping, and well, I think that's kind of stupid, and then you read, drama dialogue, and well, what do you think? I think that's lousy. Well, why do you think it's lousy? I think it's lousy. It's boom, 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 and quick-witted repartee and all of this kind of stuff, and it just goes on, just like that. And you want to know what I think? I think you're nuts. Just like that. Everybody's like on top of their game, or else on the bottom if they're supposed to be on the bottom. But it's nothing like real life. But it seems like a real conversation. It's like in a drama, when a guy gets into the getaway car and is ready to drive off, he puts his key in the ignition and it goes off. And there's no 4-second delay while the engine's starting up, because that's 4 seconds off the movie. So similarly, with edited lectures, they should sound like a lecture. They should sound natural and conversational. But it's an illusion. Behind the scenes is an editor who's, knocked out a lot of thinking noises and sentences that go in circles and clauses that don't go anywhere and all of that sort of stuff, so that it sounds just like a smoothly delivered lecture.
Well, they'll start to say something and then
change topics and
direction.
Exactly. So it's a lot of work. You need to double check your facts. When someone writes a book, he's got his references, but he's speaking in a lecture, and it's like a story about Sanatana Goswami, but actually it was Rupa. It's supposed to be in Allahabad, but actually it's in Puri or something. So you have to check your facts, you have to check your stories, you have to check your quotations, fact-checking. They may have merged two incidents, whatever. As far as possible, keep your ideas going in a straight line. It's some sort of organized fashion. Also be careful that you're not publishing something that's meant only for the audience it was spoken to and not for the general public. We got created a lot of trouble one time by publishing a lecture in which Prabhupada had made a comment about an Acharya from a different sampradaya, and I guess it was okay to say when he said it, but when it was published it created an uproar, and Prabhupada said, in the future we shall try to avoid publishing such things. We didn't know what the significance of it was. Whatever Prabhupada said, that's fine. But it was meant for a particular audience, not for print. So keep that in mind also. Don't get your speaker in trouble. Things should be organized. After A comes B, after B comes C. you may have to do some rearranging. If steps in a discussion are missing, you may need to supply them. If they're in less than the most sensible order, you may need to straighten them out. If they don't fit, you may need to cut them. Cut out what's superfluous, whether it's a word or a sentence or several paragraphs or a whole page. If you're presenting it as a lecture, try to avoid words that don't sound like they belong in a lecture, like thus, consequently, which are stuffy and non-conversational. In a conversation, you'd say something like so or and. By the way, you can begin sentences with conjunctions. Is everybody clear about that? Were you taught that you should never begin a sentence with a conjunction?
Yeah.
Ditch it. Next time, go back to your teacher and say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word, or what there, in the beginning there was, what was it? How does Genesis begin?
The world was engulfed in total darkness.
Yeah. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and God saw that it was good, and there was darkness over the waters, and there's like, it just rolls with ands beginning the sentences, and it's lasted for a long time, and it's perfectly good. There's never begin a sentence with a conjunction unless you want to. Beginning with and, beginning with but, perfectly good. No reason in the world why you shouldn't be allowed to do that. Yeah. My goodness, there's something about this article that's, even when I've unplugged it, it's gone totally mad. I don't know what to tell you about that. Okay, look, there we go, normal view. Good. I don't know, because I wrote it in one program and looking at it in another. One way to deal with lectures is don't even type them out and edit them. Just listen to them. Put on your headphones, listen to the lecture, and as you go on, just type it on the spot. Type your version on the spot. It may sometimes be easier and more faithful to the original ideas than faithfully transcribing every word. As a starting place, then from there, of course, you'll edit more, but as a way of getting it down, rather than transcribe all those words and then start crossing out and mixing, just listen to the sentence, like the way a translator would, you listen to the sentence and say it in German. So listen to the sentence and say it in English, in the edited form. Another thing you can do is make liberal use of printouts, scissors, a pen, and a stapler. Things on lectures can go so this way and that way. So cut and paste as you please. It's sometimes much easier to do this stuff on paper than on a computer. Just have piles of this and piles of that and staple this part to that part and do what you like. Then later you can come and search and do what you want and put things in the right order. But this works well for lectures, interviews, conversations. Even sometimes for the stuff you've written, it works, It's not that computers are always better. Sometimes just a printout and scissors and sticky tape or a stapler can be better. You can see everything in front of you all at once and say, put this here, and then it can really work. Does that answer your question? More about lectures?
Yeah. In this example, we're going over, I guess, maintaining it as a lecture. Are there instances where you would try to make it I guess, come across more as a written article rather than a lecture.
That's another way to go, where one way is to say these are lectures, and the other way is to not say these are lectures. And in that case, you're sort of cutting out more of the conversational, you are making it slightly more formal. You're not paying heed to the need for it to seem like something spontaneously delivered. So you adjust accordingly. That's perfectly fine.
How would you make that decision in terms of what you were going to do? Which track you're going to take?
According to the way what the material suggests to you, according to your concept for the book, you know what you want to do. Much of it's discretionary, according to what you think will touch the audience more, according to whether you think you can make it formal. You may just not be able to. Maybe you think that it'll be harder to make it formal. Maybe you think it'll be kind of get to the audience quicker as a lecturer and make him feel, kind of like he's there. On the other hand, maybe you want to make it like really a presentation, sort of a formal presentation on the topics covered, in which case you sort of unlecturize it, delecturize it, which really you don't have to do a lot to do that. It's just you withdraw the tendency to be liberal and forgiving or accommodating to the lecture style. Instead of saying, yeah, it's a lecture, and so it's going to be like this, you say, it's not a lecture, and it's got to read like an essay. It's up to you.
I've seen also expanded from a lecture.
Yeah.
It's been written out like that.
Yeah.
But I have a question. In the case where the adjustments are significant, and you're actually rearranging, is some kind of disclaimer is the wrong word, but something required?
It's very good editorial practice to tell the reader what you're doing. Adapted from lectures given in, or amplified from, or let him know what he's getting. I know there's some stuff where it's supposed to be morning walk conversations, and it's not. Somehow or other it just doesn't match, and it's like, what happened here? And it seems like some editors really went to town, and they didn't tell you. And everybody's thinking Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada said that, and if you get your hands on the tape, you'll find out he didn't say it. That's really not very good. If you're going to mess around, you have to let the reader in on what's happening. Especially if it's historically important or something. Just be straightforward. Even if you're presenting it as sort of an essay style, it's fine. These essays were originally delivered as lectures, Conway Hall or whatever. Fine. And the reader goes with that. He knows that you've prettied it up a little bit. Good. Or these are edited conversations. You still leave them as conversations, but you say, and maybe you tell about the extent of it. We've edited these conversations down so that they fit within the compass of a 42-page book, or we've deleted. We've edited to delete repetition and to go for the essence. Share with the reader. Or even if you were there, I was present on these walks, and I thought these would be great as a book, and so here's what I've done. Very good editorial practice to share with your reader what he's getting, and especially if he might otherwise get the impression that it's something that it's not. That you really don't want to do. You really don't want to give the impression that these were all the words spoken by such and such person when 2/3 of them are yours.
So that for something that you might label as being excerpts from X conversation, that's something you would probably be editing very lightly, just editing for flow.
Yeah, if they're excerpts, you again, you might edit them lightly, or you could say they're drawn from conversations.
Right.
If you want to be more, give yourself more space. Excerpt really sort of implies that it's almost verbatim.
Right.
But if you say I've drawn these such and such,
Based on.
yeah, even if you can be the author and say, I've drawn this from the following stuff. It's mostly, his ideas, but I've pulled them together, based on the teachings of, and, edited by, where it's, teachings of somebody, edited by, teachings of Satchidananda Swami, edited by. And then, people understand who's played what role. That's perfectly good. Sometimes the editor is more prominent in the thing than the author or the original source. I've taken these golden nuggets from these morning walks and expanded them, or I've cross-referenced them with things, or I've pulled them together with quotations from his books or what have you. Whatever it is that you chose to do. There's really not a whole lot of limit on what editorial tack you can take, what editorial design you might choose, but then be honest about it. This is what we did. And then the reader feels, okay, this is what I've got. Okay. It's not, by the way, that if you edit somebody's book, your name has to be on the cover. I've consulted Chicago up and down, and there's no such requirement. Anything else that you wanted to know before I go on to other topics of my own choice? Yes?
I wanted to, maybe this is just opening a huge can of worms, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about punctuation.
About?
Punctuation.
Punctuation, good.
Yeah, you had that one slide. But
Commas do look like worms.
Yeah, like for example, how do you feel about the Oxford comma?
The Oxford comma, okay. This is, everyone know what the Oxford comma is? It's also known as the serial comma. As in A, B, and C. Apples, cherries, and bananas. Do you or do you not insert a comma before and? That is the question. And the answer is that you may or you may not. But whichever course you take, be consistent about it. If you choose to retain the comma, the Oxford comma as it's called, as the New Yorker does, for example, throughout the magazine, then fine, just be consistent. And if you choose to leave it out, leave it out. Either way is acceptable. Generally, we find that books tend to be more preservative of the serial comma, and magazines tend to dispense with them more often, perhaps because of the limited length of a column in magazines. But there's no rule, as the New Yorker illustrates, that you have to dump the comma if you're a magazine. And there's no rule that you have to keep it if you're publishing books. The rule is to be consistent. In BBT books now, our policy is to keep the comma in books that we're publishing now. There are, from what I've generally seen, the best guides I've consulted usually favor keeping it, because there are instances in which it adds clarity. But either way is good. And consistency can be sacrificed in the event that leaving the comma out would create a serious possibility of misunderstanding. You may have a leave the comma out policy, but if in any given instance the absence of the comma would lead to confusion, then you put the comma in. That wasn't too bad.
We'll have more. One thing that you brought up about using the comma as, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing, but it's sort of like where you take a breath,
Mm-hmm.
and then that sentence sort of becomes a run-on sentence, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
there are two different things here. One is the sort of punctuate as you speak school, which says, as you say, where you take a breath, put a comma. Where you want to indicate a sort of a pause, put a comma. That's one school, the punctuate as you speak school. And the other school is what you might call structuralist, where they look at the grammar of the sentence and they punctuate according to grammatical rules. There's a good book, an old book, but a good book called Mind the Stop.
Mind.
The Stop.
Oh, mind.
For those who've grown up in Britain, it's a clever title, right? You use that in South Africa. Yeah, mind the stop. The expression is mind the step. So mind the stop. Stop being periods and commas. Mind the stop. It's an old book, but good. And he goes on at quite some length about these two schools, and finally advocates for the structuralists, which is where I would put my money also. If you punctuate, and again, remember 2/3 rules and 1/3 discretion, 1/3 choice. So there are places where you'd say, it could be there or not be there, but I want the reader to pause. And so you may put a comma, but first you need to know the rules and apply them consistently. And once you're good at that, then you can think about what other commas you might want to put in. The rules take some time to master, and even then they can always be funny. Are you familiar, one of the hardest or most often misunderstood issues with commas is what they call defining and non-defining, or restrictive and non-restrictive modifiers. Are you familiar with those? Okay, we're going to take you on a restrictive and non-restrictive journey here. This is an essential punctuation issue. Indeed, an essential punctuation issue. And let's see what happens here. Oh, yeah? Okay. And let's see where I've got it. Okay. I really would like to be able to see more than I'm able to see here. Let's see what I get with this. Okay, this is a basic course in punctuation. Use periods. They take no more room than commas and less room than witches. Commas, the serial comma. Oh, yes. We've talked about, bananas, oranges, and apples, but there are places where adjectives pile up and no commas belong. The venerable old Bengali saintly person deserves no commas. These are equal and parallel qualifiers of the same noun. A battered old canvas fishing hat, a red brick Georgian house, ghastly old demoniac witch, mild autumn sunlight, and so on. Pretty little white champak flowers. You really wouldn't want to have pretty little white. I saw this in the New Republic magazine. I dislike the National Rifle Association as much as the next liberal, comma, northeastern, comma, city-dwelling, comma, deer sympathizer. Whoever edited that deserved to lose a week's pay at the least. This is a basic rule that two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction get a comma before the conjunction. The raised eyebrows tell me that you don't know what an independent clause is.
Correct.
It's basically something that can stand on its own as a sentence. I went to Georgia and then I visited Chicago. Take out the and, which is a coordinating conjunction, and you'd have two sentences essentially. So when you put two of them together like that with a coordinating conjunction, put a comma before. But, and some overzealous BBT proofreader back in the day thought that she had a mastery of this rule and applied it where it didn't belong. Krishna declares that we must all surrender to him, comma, and he will protect us from sinful reactions, is wrong. Because what you're looking at here is not two independent clauses, but a compound object of what Krishna declares. He declares that A and he declares that B. And putting the comma there is just a gross error. An error which unfortunately is still seen in many BBT books. Okay, restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. Restrictors also means defining. They're also called defining clauses. And what it is a clause that puts in, let's see. Yeah, the donation, which are meant for the deity, should not be used for oneself. Now, if you put the commas in, it means one thing. If you take them out, it means another. The donations, all the donations, which are meant for the deity, should not be used for oneself. So that's a non-restrictive clause. It doesn't say, okay, these are a subset of the donations. We're restricting ourselves to these donations only. All the donations are meant for the deity. They shouldn't be taken for yourself. Now, if you take the commas out, the donations which are meant for the deities should not be used for oneself. Someone may donate to Radha Govinda and someone may donate to you. You can use what they donate to you, but not what they donate to Radha Govinda or Radha Muralidhar. That's for the deities. So that's restrictive. These donations are the ones we're talking about, not all donations. So the clause defines which ones we mean, or restricts the scope to the particular ones we mean. So in that case, you set off the non-restrictive with commas, a set of commas, or a comma and a period if it comes at the end. And non-restrictive, which just provide extra information, those get set off by commas. And it takes a while, but after a while, this should just be second nature to you. For most of the time, you should just say, okay, restrictive, non-restrictive, almost unconsciously, and get them right. And sometimes you really have to puzzle over it and say which is meant, either because you don't know what the author intended or because it's a close call. It could go either way. But you should have these rules should be so down that it's like, eating with your right hand. It's just, this is what we do. Very frequent use of of commas, and very frequently bungled. Yes?
In many versions of Word, at least mine, I don't know the standard, whenever there's no comma before the which or the who, it marks it as wrong.
Say that again?
In many versions of Word, at least my version, whenever you use
Grammar checkers. Don't believe them. They lie.
they are what is it again?
Prevaricators. Yeah, don't trust not in these prevaricators. Grammar checkers are highly unreliable. I always have my grammar checker turned off. I never use it. I find it gets in the way. Your spell checker should do things like identify double words and stuff like that. But no, the only people who should use grammar checkers are people who know their grammar. Otherwise, you can easily be misled. Now, I'm saying that maybe if there's some people, even if they're misled, they'll still be doing better than if they were on their own. But if you're a serious editor, don't depend on a grammar checker. They're highly unreliable. They don't really know the rules. They only know some of the rules, and that too imperfectly. They're just not good enough.
Well, they're not really reading the text.
Yeah, they're not reading the text.
The intention is
They're applying, what logic they know, but you can't rely on it. Like a sentence like this, the donations which are meant for the deity, how does the grammar checker know? You actually have to know the meaning, and then you can decide whether your commas are in or they're out.
Notice it a lot, like on some of the things that I've been working on, that if a sentence starts with so or then, if there's no comma there, the grammar checker squawks.
Yeah.
And in some cases I can go, yeah, I want to put a comma there. In other cases I'm like, not so much.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. There's a lot more here about commas. Some commas prevent misunderstanding. The year before, Srila Prabhupada had gone to Malaysia. The year before, Srila Prabhupada had gone to Malaysia. You really need the comma. Or outside, the house looked bleak and sinister. Otherwise, your reader has to double back. Outside the house looked bleak and sinister. Okay. Commas with becauses. That clear enough? A because phrase without a comma speaks about why. A because phrase with a comma speaks about why not. He never went to Vrindavan, comma, because he was devoted to the deity. He never went to Vrindavan because he was devoted to the deity. They're two different things. All right. Are there more punctuation questions you have?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
shoot.
One other question that I had was about the usage of semicolons.
Semicolons. Semicolons are, I think, somewhat more than a comma and somewhat less than a period.
Yeah, the last time that I took any sort of writing course was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I had like AP'd out of any university writing course. But I just remember, like, my teachers would say, that semicolon, that you should use semicolons because they make you look smarter than you actually are.
What a great
But I use them sparingly, but I'm never quite sure if I've
In general, the semicolon is a deservedly less used mark. The period and comma are used liberally. The semicolon is used for special instances. You use semicolons when you want to put together two independent clauses and not have a conjunction between them. Usually it indicates a closeness, like he didn't have to ask, semicolon, he already knew. The two are so close that you don't want to make them two sentences, but you can't just join them with a comma. That a comma is not enough, and a period might be too much. A period might be okay. You might say, he didn't have to ask, period. He already knew. And that would be a very modern, probably be the modern preference these days. But there are times when you want to indicate that closeness. This is the same sentence, really, but if it weren't the same sentence, there'd be a period there. That's one use of the semicolon. There are other times when, to prevent confusion in a sentence, it's already got commas going on to play one game, and you want to play another game, or you want to indicate something else, and another comma won't do it because there's already these commas.
Like a list of cities and states.
A list of cities and states, for example, or
Names and titles.
What is it to forgive is divine? What is the to err is human, semicolon. To forgive, comma, divine. If you had a comma instead of the semicolon, it wouldn't work. To err is human, semicolon. To forgive, comma, divine. Now everything's orderly. The comma indicates an ellipsis, that you left out the word is. You didn't want to repeat it, so you put a comma instead. Right? You were going to say to forgive to err is human, to forgive is divine, but you're leaving out the is and putting a comma instead. But now you want to pull these things together, so you're going to use a semicolon and put it all in a package. Comma wouldn't do. So a semicolon's more than a comma, less than a period.
And to be used sparingly. And to be used sparingly.
Use sparingly, yeah. Use it when it really wants to be used, not just as an alternative period. You know, it's not just should I use a full stop or a semi? Well, let me use a semi. When you want to use it because you've got a good reason, then reach for the semicolon. Otherwise, stick with your periods, stick with your commas.
Is it passe? I mean, I learned sentence, semicolon, however, comma, finish the sentence. It seems like I don't see that anymore. Is that comma after however necessary?
Yes. However is a funny bird. It's like a but. It indicates antithesis or an opposite. A good piece of advice is usually to avoid beginning sentences with howevers. If I begin a sentence with, I would prefer a but to a however. I would bury a however, though. The problem, so I'd say, but the problem is, or I'd say, the problem, however, is. I'd prefer to bury my howevers than to start sentences with them. It just works, it's cleaner.
But following a semicolon.
Following a semicolon is essentially like starting a new sentence. But yes, following a semicolon, you could have a however. However is almost always, I can't think of an instance where I wouldn't want a comma, except, and this is where you need to be careful, where however begins something entirely different, like the problem, comma, however you might think of it, or however you slice it, or however, then it's an entirely different however.
Yeah.
And then it never gets a comma. But if it's essentially means but, or on the other hand, then surround it with commas.
And the same could be said for therefore?
Yeah. Although therefore gets along without commas much better. The problem, therefore, it can be unpunctuated if you like. The problem, therefore, is what to do. That can go. It's up to you, really. The problem, therefore, or the problem, therefore, is, you could, if you're punctuating lightly, you could leave that out. However, can't live in that environment. Okay. Appositions, you know what appositions are? Appositions are words butted up against equivalent words. Donald Trump, comma, the president. The president stands in apposition to Donald Trump. It's therefore surrounded by commas. The drunk driver, a resident of hell, screamed across the road, blah, blah, blah. They get surrounded with commas. Sometimes you'll see one comma, you see it half surrounded. That doesn't work. Commas for apposition work in pairs. And that can be a very economical way for doing things, to take restrictive modifiers and just clip out the which are. The Havi, comma, who was one of the 9 Yogendras, said, you can just knock out who was, and then you're in apposition, rather than having a who was clause. Just tighten it up. There's something also I can tell you about that is and which are, but I'd have to codify it in my mind, and I don't have it codified, and I don't think you need it right now. It's a question of when you use that and when you use which. They're pretty much interchangeable, but
We don't use that with unrestricted clauses.
yeah, I've even forgotten what the formal rule is. I'll tell you what my rule is. With non-restrictive clauses, I use which, and for all others, I use that. That makes my life very simple, because I know that if I've got a which, I need a comma, because it's going to be a non-restrictive modifier. And I know that if I've got a that, like the key that was lying on the table, then I know it's going to be restrictive. And I know I'm not going to use commas there. So I reserve, which you don't have to, but it saved me so much needless mentation. If you just use your which as the choice for exclusively for non-restrictive modifiers, then whiches and commas go together, and you don't have to think about anything else. Works great. I don't even remember what the rule is that I'm simplifying there, but
I think there is is a formal rule that you cannot use that within a.
Yeah, you can use it for. You can use which or that for this, or you can. But you can only use that for that. There's some sort of rule there.
It shouldn't be a comma and then that for understanding.
Yeah, the whole thing is. It's been so long since I've had to think about that because my rule works so well.
Your rule is perfect.
I can't make it a principle of the English language and require everyone else to follow it, but boy, does it work well. Any other questions from the punctuation lady? No. Yes.
Anything you want to say about commas versus parentheses versus em dashes?
Yeah. Parentheses tend to be quieter. And they also, they do two different things. Sometimes they're quieter. They're sort of set off more. They're more removed from the main sentence. They whisper a little bit more, a little bit.
By the way.
Yeah, by the way. Whereas when you set them off with commas, they're still there. They're still parenthetical, but they're more part of the sentence, more part of the main flow than when you set them off by commas. That, I would say, is one distinction. Parentheses may be also more suited for something that's major, as in a big block of information, or almost a full sentence that's going in there, like her uncle, parentheses, he'd graduated from Harvard when he was 14, parentheses, unrelated information, that wouldn't just go in there with commas. There are various ways, various times when parentheses would work and commas wouldn't. But in the places where you can't really tell, then the distinction I would say is that parentheses remove the parenthetical material just a bit more, maybe quiet it more or set it off more.
Em dashes?
Em dashes. Em dashes, I'd say, are more, I use them more for drama. There was a line from Solzhenitsyn. He's talking about some female guard who performed atrocities on prisoners, and he says, Ivanova Stelovich dash, that bitch. Dash. Dashes give you drama. And I use them mainly that way. They can also be used when you have something long and separate to set off. Then dashes may also work. Again, when things get too complicated because of too many commas, dashes may work. Dashes should be used sparingly. There are people who dash all over the place, every time they want to set something off a little bit, dash, 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 dash. I would use them sparingly for drama, mainly, or for out of structural necessity sometimes, not just as another form of parentheses or another form of comma. They're more dramatic. When you want to up the decibels a little bit, use a dash. By the way, exclamation points in journalism, they're sometimes called screamers. Because scream is what they do. They should be used sparingly, if at all. They should never be used in multiple, in multiples, unless you're Tom Wolfe. Those who've read Tom Wolfe, he's famous for, like 8 exclamation points in a row, or stuff like that. But he gets away with it because he's so damn good, you know. So it's like one of those things. If you're Shakespeare, you can do this or that. If you're not, so we don't recommend multiple exclamation points. And in general, exclamation points should be reserved for instances where something is truly worthy of exclamation, like the one I just gave you from Solzhenitsyn. That deserves an exclamation point. But just every time you saw, you know, and there were no clouds in the sky. You know, if that was really impressive and singular, perhaps you might want to exclaim it. But you read prose where there's exclamation point after exclamation point, even when something is perhaps worthy of an exclam, you might consider understatement. You know, because they scream. Exclamation points they really scream. And sometimes you want to scream. Sometimes you just say, "This is intolerable!" Exclamation point. But if you do it too much, then you're always screaming. You're like a person who's always at high pitch, and it's like, calm down, calm down, calm down. No, but you know, your prose will seem wired if you're just always exclaiming. So save them for when they really count, and then you'll get power out of them. All caps are a no-no. If you really have to emphasize, use italics, and even then, take it easy. Exclamation points, semicolons, colons introduce something. They say X equals Y. There were 4 reasons he did this, colon, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not the same as the semicolons. Semicolons and colons are never interchangeable. They do different things. As follows, colons say as follows. This is what he said, colon. Semicolon is a mistake in an instance like that. Colons introduce in that form. Here it is, colon. Semicolons.
This is a small thing, but following the colon, cap or not?
Usually cap. Usually a colon and, oh, I'm sorry, a colon. I'm thinking exclamation points. You look in Chicago, but if I recall, the rule is not fully in my mind. I believe if it's a full sentence, it's capped, and if not, no. Certainly if it's just a sentence fragment, it would be lowercase. Consult Chicago. Consult Chicago. Something else. Colons, semicolons, quotation marks. Do periods go inside or outside of quotation marks? It depends whether you're from Britain or South Africa or not. In this country, they go inside. All the punctuation marks go inside quotation marks, except if it's something like he considered himself a, quote, aristocrat, exclamation point. Then the sense of the sentence, you know, if the whole sentence were quoted, then your exclam would go inside. But because it's just a word that's quoted, it goes outside. But your commas, your periods, they go inside. Semicolons go outside. Colons go outside. Again, Chicago will give you good guidance. I'll give you a little reading list of books that'll give you all this stuff. You don't really need me for these rules, especially since I don't always remember. Something else. Okay, we have yes?
This is just new type of communication.
Loud.
Social media, new type of communication.
Social media.
Yeah. So you have 140 characters to make a post or a tweet or something like
right.
that. Do it like that. And sometimes you use emojis. Have
Yeah.
you ever used an emoji?
Yeah, I have to admit that I have.
What would you say for any of that? Because that will continue to make it.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different area now. You know, texting and Facebook and all of that, what constitutes proper grammar, proper spelling, proper style, proper expression in those media. You know, personally, anybody who writes me a letter that has things like YR and, you know, they just get ditched because it's too much trouble for me to, you know, somebody writes me a letter like that. Yeah, if they text me, I can understand, you know, but no, I just say, you know, if it's not worth your time, it's not worth my time. You know, all your little telephone contractions. It's not worth your time, it's not worth my time. That said, you know, social media and all these things, they're more informal. But if you use proper, if you use proper punctuation, spelling, and so on, you come across as more careful, more thoughtful, more educated, or better educated, more considerate. So there used to be, back in the days of Usenet, if anyone remembers Usenet, back in the days when the internet was the province of the military and academia exclusively, there were rules that were sort of Emily Post guidelines for posting messages, and you were advised to think carefully about what you posted, to go over it for spelling and punctuation, to sit on your hot messages for at least 24 hours before you press the send button. You know, all these thoughtful considerations seem to have gone out of style, but there's much to be said for it. You know, if you post and you're careful about what you post, even as far as your grammar and your spelling and so on. I know I had one, I won't expose her. Anyway, somebody who was expected to be careful about her use of the English and facts and stuff. She had her, on her letterhead, she had her zip code wrong. And you know, what did it tell me? You know, there's a carelessness there. So if you also if you use things like good grammar, proper use of parallels, you match parts and so on, chances are you're going to come across just better on whatever media you use, as more thoughtful, more intelligent, more likely to be on top of your game. And this goes for everything, you know, posts that, you know, the stuff that you sticky tape to the railings to tell people which way to go for a class, the stuff that's on your Facebook page about when your hours are. I sent a note to your webmaster saying altar is spelled A-L-T-A-R, and, you know, when we're talking about where Krishna stands, not E-R, as in don't alter my text. It makes a difference. People look at that and they say, well, you know, these are less educated people, you know, they belong to a lower demographic. And when you're careful about your language, when it's clear and it's well expressed, or, you know, it doesn't, not like you know, what's on the side of your toothpaste has to be a work of art, but when it's clear and concise and so on, people say, okay. So I would extend the use of good English to all of these. And, you know, there are places where you definitely want to be less formal and where you want your language to be like that. But there's also a kind of and Strunk and White has a little passage about that where people are like feigning a breezy mindset, you know. Hey guys, what do you think? WHADDYA, and, you know, just trying to be like, you know, carefree and all of that. And it comes off like, oh God, you know, there's this bore again. You know? Yeah. Now, that said, again, in the hands of a masterful writer, these things all have their place. So like Tom Wolfe can say, you know, what do you, but he's using it like the way William Buckley uses 7-syllable words. It's carefully chosen for a particular purpose, and it has the effect. But just to sort of aspire to a breezy style by being just so chummy and everything, it's like any other questions here? I can do two or three things. Should we stop at 3:30? Because I have a little more time, but I'm perfectly good with stopping at 3:30 because you've got schedules. Let's stop at 3:30. Okay. Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna stop at 3:30 as advertised. I have a lot of stuff which I can give you. The aforementioned dictionary, aforementioned thesaurus is available to you, and various other goodies for those who have pen drives. I could load you up now for those who don't. You can come see Vasudev, or I could.
No, I have the materials that you gave me.
Oh, I have. So okay, so you can see Rati. He's got all sorts of stuff. Just various things that would be useful. I don't know if I've given you all the fun stuff. There's a little bit of fun stuff that I may not have thrown you. More of those misuses of English. I would say in conclusion that we're sort of just touching on editorial topics. There's more and more. There are good books, and I can give you a list of good books that will be in the package that Rusty has. It's probably an out-of-date list. I haven't looked around in the bookstores to see what's new and better, but these are old and reliable sources of guidance and instruction. And you can use this in Krishna service, whether you're editing your spiritual master's stuff or you're editing stuff for the temple, for its communications, or you're writing a book, or whatever it is that you're doing. There's a lot here. For those who are really interested in an editorial future, the BBT has a great need for editors. Dravida and I are sort of you know, when we go, there's already a shortage of editors, and when we go, the shortage is going to get more short. So we are keenly interested in devotees who'd really like to make this their service, who'd, you know, some people want to be pujaris, and some people want to be book distributors, and some people might want to be editors. There's a ton of stuff that needs to be edited every day. So if that interests you, then by all means, pursue that interest. Otherwise, in all of your other endeavors, I hope that this will be useful for you in Krishna service. Thank you all. Hare Krishna.